안녕하세요.
The biting cold of the Seoul night was nothing compared to the whirlwind of emotions inside Hae-jin. Sitting on a bench in the park, she gripped the old keychain between her fingers, feeling its cold metal against her warm skin. Kang Min sat beside her, but neither of them spoke. They both knew that this moment would change their lives forever. "I don't know what to do, Kang Min," she finally said, breaking the silence that surrounded them. "Part of me wants to believe in you, but the other part still feels scared." He took a deep breath before speaking, choosing each word carefully. "I understand, Hae-jin. I know I can't change the past, but I can choose how to move forward from here. I should never have left without explaining. I was wrong, and if you can't forgive me, I'll accept that." She turned her face to look at Kang Min. His gaze was sincere, free of the arrogance he once carried. There was only vulnerability now. "If it's a goodbye?" Hae-jin smiled faintly, but it was a sad smile. "I wish things had been different, Kang Min, but I think some stories just aren't meant to continue." He lowered his head, accepting her words. As much as it hurt, he knew it was the truth. "I hope you find happiness, Hae-jin." She nodded, holding the keychain one last time before placing it in his hand. "Keep this, to remember that, for a while, something real existed between us." Kang Min closed his fingers around the keychain and watched her stand up. Without looking back, Hae-jin walked away, disappearing into the city lights. "If it's a new beginning," Hae-jin sighed, feeling the doubts fighting against her emotions. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened, but maybe we can start over." Slowly, Kang Min's eyes lit up with hope. "That's all I want. What matters is that you're willing to try." She smiled, this time a real smile. "But you'll have to prove that you've changed, and I won't make it easy for you." He chuckled softly. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." The city of Seoul never slept, and the offices of SJ Corporation reflected this reality. At the top of one of the most imposing skyscrapers, Seo-jun found himself in his office, reviewing reports with the precision of a man who allowed no room for error. For him, perfection was the only acceptable form of work. His gaze cut through the sheets of paper as though he could decipher everything just by the strength of his mind. "Mr. Seo, the communications director is on the line. Would you like to speak with him?" his assistant asked hesitantly. He didn't lift his eyes from the papers. "If it's about the image crisis, send an email. I don't have time for excuses." The assistant nodded and left, leaving Seo-jun in his calculated world. But the tranquility was shattered when the office door suddenly swung open. "I'm sorry, Mr. Seo." She came in without permission. The assistant tried to intervene, but her voice faltered in the air. A woman appeared, with a defiant and determined look. Seo-jun recognized that face immediately, but he couldn't hide his shock. His eyes narrowed as he watched her, recalling memories he thought were buried. "Na-ri, so this is how you handle crises? Hiding in your glass tower?" Her voice was firm, without a trace of hesitation. Seo-jun leaned back in his chair, studying her with a cold and calculating gaze. "I didn't know my company hired amateur journalists to give lectures on management." Na-ri's eyes sparkled with a mixture of challenge and anger. "I'm not here to lecture. I'm here because you need me, Mr. Seo." The silence hung in the air. Seo-jun raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "This is interesting. Go on." Na-ri crossed her arms, as if preparing for a confrontation. "Your image is in ruins. You can keep pretending you don't care, but the investors do. The solution? A documentary that shows a human side of you. I'm the producer. You'll have to deal with me." Seo-jun let out a brief laugh, but his eyes scrutinized Na-ri, as if evaluating an opponent. "And what if I don't want to?" Na-ri leaned slightly over the table, the proximity between them making the air tense. "Then, in less than a month, your company could face an irreversible credibility decline." He remained silent, tapping his fingers on the glass table. Seo-jun was a man of numbers, statistics, and probabilities, and he knew Na-ri was right. "Let's say I agree. What exactly will your role be?" Na-ri smiled faintly. "I'll be by your side every day, documenting your routine, every interaction, every decision. The world will see who you really are. Seo-joon reclined in his chair, studying Nari. The game was set, and he didn't like losing. All right, Nari, but let me make one thing clear. If you think you can turn me into a kind and compassionate man in front of the cameras, you're mistaken. I'm not that kind of person. She held his gaze, unwavering. What if I told you I'm not here to change you, Seo-joon? I'm here to reveal the truth, whatever it may be. The air grew heavy, but there were no more words, just a silence laden with unspoken challenges. The film crew was already set up when Seo-joon entered the meeting room. He surveyed the faces around him with a cold gaze, not hiding his displeasure with the entire situation. Sitting at the center of the table, he crossed his arms and drummed his fingers against the polished wood. Let's get this over with. I have a company to run. His sharp voice echoed throughout the room. Nari, across the table, kept a neutral expression as she organized the documents in front of her. Her gaze met his for a brief moment before she spoke. The documentary isn't about you pretending to be something you're not, Seo-joon. It's about showing who you really are. No filters, no scripts. He let out a short, sarcastic laugh. And you really think the world wants to see that? A CEO who has no patience for cheap sentimentality? Nari tilted her head, studying him with a perceptive look. Maybe the world wants to see the man behind the armor. Seo-joon clenched his jaw. There was something in those words that bothered him more than he cared to admit. Before he could respond, one of the cameramen announced that they were ready to begin. The first shot was in the employees' break room. The space, usually filled with the rigid sound of Seo-joon's orders, now stood heavy with an eerie silence. He walked through the room, feeling the eyes on him. He knew what they were thinking. An unforgiving, impersonal, and unreachable boss. Let's try something different. Nari's voice cut through the air. Instead of just observing, how about interacting? Ask your employees what it's like to work here. Seo-joon raised an eyebrow, clearly not liking the suggestion. But when he noticed the challenging expression on Nari's face, something inside him made him give in. He hesitantly approached one of the employees, a young man named Ji-hoon, who kept his gaze lowered. The camera captured every detail of that uncomfortable moment. What's it like working here? Seo-joon asked, his voice carrying a formal, almost robotic tone. Ji-hoon lifted his eyes, clearly surprised by the question. It took him a few seconds to answer. It's a challenging environment. He hesitated, but also very demanding. People here work under constant pressure. Seo-joon crossed his arms, processing the employee's words. The camera captured everything. The silence stretched until Nari intervened. Did you expect that answer? She asked, looking directly at Seo-joon. He turned his gaze to the window. No, he hadn't expected it. He'd always assumed that employees were just grateful to be working in his company. But there, in front of the camera, he realized there was so much he had never bothered to see. Nari reviewed the footage from the previous day, while sipping a strong coffee in the small editing room within SJ Corporation. Every expression of Seo-joon, every pause, and every fleeting glance captured by the cameras were meticulously analyzed. She knew he was uncomfortable, but she also knew that something inside him was changing. On the other side of the company, Seo-joon stared at the pile of reports on his desk, but his mind was trapped in the interaction with Ji-hoon. There was something in the employee's response that bothered him. It wasn't just the fact that he admitted to working under pressure, but the way he spoke, as if it were a universal truth within that company. For the first time in a long while, Seo-joon found himself wondering if the image he projected truly reflected who he was. The day went on, and new recordings were scheduled. Nari entered Seo-joon's office without waiting for permission, accustomed to the dynamic of the past few days. He didn't even bother to fake surprise. Today, we're filming you outside the corporate environment, she said, placing the documentary script on his desk. Seo-joon raised his eyes, clearly displeased with the idea. Outside the corporate environment? You want me to pretend to be someone I'm not? Nari crossed her arms and smiled slightly. I want to show who you are when you're not surrounded by rules and numbers. Someone beyond the CEO of SJ Corporation. Seo-joon drummed his fingers on the desk, pondering for a moment. Finally, he let out a tired sigh. And where exactly do you want to take me? Nari smiled. To the local market. Seo-jun furrowed his brow. Market? What does that have to do with the company? She pulled up a chair and sat across from him. It has to do with the people who work for you. I want you to see how they live, what they buy, what they need. Your work affects the lives of many people, but do you know how they live? He fell silent for a moment. It was a perspective he had never considered before. Later, the cameras captured Seo-jun walking through the market, observing stalls filled with fruits, vegetables, and local products. He saw faces he had never noticed before. Workers, merchants, ordinary people who in some way were impacted by his business decisions. For the first time, he felt a different discomfort, one that didn't come from the presence of the cameras, but from a truth he had never wanted to face. As he walked, an elderly vendor approached him, holding a basket of fruit. "Young man, you seem like a busy man. Try this apple, sweet as it should be." Seo-jun hesitated but took the fruit. Na-ri, by his side, observed closely. He took a bite, and to his surprise he smiled faintly. "It's good," he admitted. The vendor smiled widely. "That makes me happy. We work hard to offer the best." Na-ri leaned slightly toward Seo-jun and whispered, "Now ask her about her day." He looked at Na-ri, suspicious, but followed her advice. "And how is your day going today?" The woman laughed. "Difficult, as always, but it's life. If we don't work, we don't eat. And if we don't smile, we don't live." The experience at the local market left Seo-jun unsettled. For the first time in years, he had allowed himself to look at the world outside the windows of his glass office. But as this sparked a new curiosity, it also brought uncomfortable memories. That night, he stayed at the company late, poring over financial reports, but his mind kept wandering. The face of the elderly vendor and her simple words continued to echo in his head. If we don't smile, we don't live. He had never stopped to think about what that really meant. Na-ri entered the room without knocking, something he had long since stopped trying to correct. "Something's changed in you," she said, closing the door behind her. Seo-jun lifted his eyes to her but didn't answer immediately. "Is that a problem?" he asked with an ironic tone. Na-ri smiled, leaning against his desk. "It depends. You're finally starting to see things from a different angle. But there's still something you're hiding, isn't there?" Seo-jun fell silent for a moment, his gaze distant. That documentary was revealing more about him than he wanted to admit. "I grew up in a humble neighborhood," he finally confessed. "I spent my life trying to escape the lack of resources, the pressure of not having enough. Maybe that's why I became so obsessed with success." Na-ri didn't show surprise, but her eyes softened. "That's nothing to be ashamed of, Seo-jun. But you've always thought you had to hide that part of you, haven't you?" He averted his gaze. The image he had built over the years never allowed for vulnerability. But now, sitting in front of Na-ri, he wondered if it was time to stop running from who he truly was. Na-ri pulled a chair and sat across from him, as if giving him the space to continue speaking. "You work so hard to maintain this impenetrable image, but doesn't that get exhausting?" she asked, her voice softer now. Seo-jun let out a long sigh, running his hand through his hair. "I never thought about it. I always thought hard work was the only way. And in a way, I still do. But lately I've been wondering if all of this was worth it." Na-ri tilted her head, studying him. "And what's your answer?" Seo-jun stayed silent for a moment before looking at her. His gaze, which had always been filled with skepticism and coldness, now held a spark of vulnerability. "I still don't know." The Sethi day broke with a cloudy sky, reflecting the uncertainty in Seo-jun's heart. He stood before the massive windows of his office, gazing at the city below. His empire, his identity, everything he had built over the years now seemed like a mirror of himself, imposing on the outside, but hollow within. Na-ri entered the room with steady steps, holding an envelope. She closed the door behind her and observed him for a moment before speaking. "The documentary is ready." Her voice was firm, but there was a softness in it, a touch of something Seo-jun couldn't name. He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. There was an unspoken question between them. "What are you going to do now?" he finally asked. Na-ri gave a small smile, but it was melancholic. "My part in this is done. Now it's up to you to decide what to do with all of this. Seo-jun took the envelope from her hands, but didn't open it. He simply observed her, realizing this might be the last time he saw her. The silence between them seemed heavier than any words. The documentary had changed many things, but the biggest question remained. What did the future hold for them? If it's a goodbye, he took a deep breath, diverting his gaze to the window once more. Maybe it's better this way, he said, trying to hide the pain in his voice. Na-ri nodded, fighting the urge to say more. But she knew some stories end like this, incomplete but true. She gave one last look at Seo-jun before leaving only the silence and the cold city outside. He remained there for long minutes, holding the envelope but lacking the courage to open it. When he finally did, he saw his own image reflected in a way he never imagined. And for the first time, he allowed himself to question whether the path he chose had been worth it. He remained still, the emptiness of the space around him echoing his solitude. The future now belonged only to him. Seo-jun squeezed the envelope in his hands and let out a heavy sigh. Na-ri. She looked up at him, surprised to hear her name spoken so vulnerably. Stay, he said softly, almost as a plea. Na-ri studied him for a long moment. Perhaps a different future awaited them. Perhaps the end didn't need to be a goodbye. And what do you want, Seo-jun? Her voice was low, almost a whisper. He swallowed, as if trying to find the right words. I want to try. I want to discover who I really am, but I don't want to do it alone. Na-ri's smile was small, but sincere. Then, you won't have to. She took a small step toward him, and for the first time, Seo-jun felt he could leave the past behind. The future was still uncertain, but this time, he wouldn't be alone. The chapter ends with them facing each other, no certainties, but with a silent hope between them. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing over Seoul and everything that had been left behind.
You're my eternal